The following content is based on public court records from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The names, dates, and events described are taken directly from the official legal transcript regarding the 2010 death of Michael Correia. This video is intended for educational, historical, and memorial purposes. Listener discretion is advised. On October 20th, 2010, Jonathan Nemec stabbed Michael Correia 6 times with a small folding pocket knife, killing him. The Commonwealth's theory of motive was that both men had been vying for the affection of the same woman. The primary dispute at trial was whether the victim was the first aggressor, whether the defendant acted in self-defense, and who first had possession of the knife. In the summer of 2010, Nemec was 22 years old and living in a halfway house in New Bedford for individuals who were recovering from alcohol and drug abuse. He was dating Lisa Weaver, who lived at a different sober house in New Bedford. During his time at the halfway house, Nemec befriended his roommates, James Nason and Nathan Goodwin. Nemec also introduced Nason to his friend Carrie Wright, and the two began dating. In August of 2010, Nemec left town for approximately 2 months. While he was away, Nemec wrote Weaver 2 love letters describing how perfect she was and how he missed her and imagined them being together. At the same time, however, Weaver and Michael appeared to have begun a romantic relationship. They were seen as public on a number of occasions, flirting, holding hands, and kissing. Nemec returned to New Bedford in October 2010 and moved in with his grandmother. A few days before the stabbing, Nason told Nemec about the relationship between Weaver and Michael. Nason also said that Michael had referred to Nemec as a punk and had bragged that Michael could take any girl away from Nemec. Nemec told Nason that when they next met, he would punch Michael in the head. A friend of Weaver, who was her roommate at the sober house, testified that at some point a few days prior to the stabbing, Nemec had appeared at an Alcoholics Anonymous AA meeting looking for Michael. On October 19, 2010, Weaver, Wright, and Nason picked up Nemec in a sport utility vehicle belonging to Wright's mother. Weaver and Nemec embraced when they saw each other and sat together in the rear seat. At some point, Wright heard Nemec angrily asking, with reference to an unknown topic, "Why didn't you tell me that?" The group spent the day at Wright's parents' house, where the relationship between Weaver and Nemec seemed affectionate, as usual. The group left so that Weaver could get back to the sober house before her 11 p.m. curfew. They planned to meet the following day to paint a property in Abington that belonged to Weaver's parents. On October 20th, 2010, at approximately 3 p.m., Nemec, Weaver, Nason, and Wright arrived at the building in Abington and painted until 6:30 p.m. when it got dark. They left intending to return to New Bedford. En route, Weaver realized that she did not have her house key. She then remembered that some of her housemates would be attending an AA meeting at a soup kitchen in New Bedford, which regularly took place from 7 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. on Wednesdays, and decided that she could later enter the sober house with them. The 4 thus headed to the soup kitchen. On the way, Nemec asked Nason to stop at the side of the road because he had to urinate. But Wright would not allow this, as neither she nor Nason had a valid driver's license, and she did not want Nason to be caught at the side of the road if any police officers passed by. Between 70 and 120 people attended the meeting that evening. Nemec, Weaver, Nason, and Wright reached the soup kitchen shortly before the usual break between 7:30 and 7:45 p.m., when many people would go outside to smoke. Nason parked approximately 200 yards from the front door. Wright remained in the vehicle, while the others headed to the soup kitchen. They encountered their former roommate, Goodwin, standing outside. Nason and Nemec chatted with Goodwin for approximately 5 minutes, and then went inside to use the restroom. Weaver also went into the building to use the restroom and then joined the crowd outside. When Nemec and Nason returned to the vehicle, the break had begun and numerous meeting participants were heading outside. Nason pointed out to Nemec that Michael was at the meeting and then returned to the SUV. At that point, approximately 80 people were outside in a small, crowded area. Michael and Goodwin were standing approximately 15 feet from the entrance to the soup kitchen, looking at something on a cellular telephone. Nemec went over to talk to Weaver, who was standing on the corner near a crosswalk approximately 30 feet away from Michael. Nason moved the SUV closer to the crosswalk and stayed inside with the vehicle idling. Nemec gestured to Michael, indicating that he wanted to talk. Michael apparently held up a finger in a just-a-minute gesture. Nemec gave Weaver a quick goodbye kiss. She seemed concerned and appeared to try to pull him back from talking to Michael, and then Nemec and Weaver kissed again. At some point, Nemec pulled the hood of his sweatshirt up. He crossed the street and opened the rear passenger door of the SUV as though he were about to get in, but then left the door slightly ajar and walked over to Michael. Nemec said, "I've been hearing some things. I feel disrespected." Michael asked what Nemec had heard. Nemec began punching Michael, aiming at his head, while Michael attempted to ward off the blows. Nemec tried to hold Michael in a headlock, but Michael broke free. At some point, Michael lifted his arms up with his palms facing outward and said something to the effect of, "What? Are you going to use a knife?" Nemec lunged at Michael 4 to 5 times. Michael ran into the soup kitchen. Nemec chased him into the building. About 20 seconds later, Nemec ran out of the building and into the SUV. The vehicle then was driven away. Bystanders carried Michael, who was saying that he had been stabbed and that someone should telephone 911 upstairs to the meeting hall and tried to render first aid. His father was present. Emergency medical technicians arrived within a few minutes. Michael lost consciousness shortly thereafter. He was taken to a hospital by ambulance, where physicians attempted emergency surgery, but their efforts were unsuccessful, and Michael was pronounced dead. He had suffered 5 stab wounds, any one of which could have been fatal. The 2 wounds on the left side of the chest had penetrated the heart, and a wound to the lower right side had perforated the liver. The 4th and 5th wounds were to the back and the lateral part of the chest. Michael was determined to have died within minutes of the stabbing. Meanwhile, the SUV, with Nason driving, headed toward the highway. Nemec noticed that he had blood on his hands. Wright also noticed the blood and that Nemec had a small black folding knife in his lap. Nemec told the others that he had been in a fight with Michael. He thought he had stabbed Michael and he hoped Michael was okay. Nemec wanted to go to his grandmother's house, but Wright told Nason to drop him off at a grocery store in Fairhaven. Nemec threw the knife out the window near the exit to the grocery store. When they reached the grocery store parking lot, Nemec cleaned the blood from his hands, with Wright's help, using one of her tank tops that had been in the back of the SUV. He discarded the tank top in the parking lot. The others headed to Wright's parents' house, and Nemec waited at the grocery store until his grandmother picked him up. At 8:30 p.m., Nemec and his grandmother went to the home of John Voisin, the stepfather of a close friend of Nemec's. Nemec borrowed some clothes from Voisin and remained in his apartment for approximately 4 hours. Nemec told Voisin he had been in a fight with Michael, that he was worried Michael might be dead, and that he had not intended to harm Michael, but had been acting in self-defense. Nemec left sometime before midnight. That evening, police interviewed multiple witnesses. They investigated the grocery store parking lot and discovered a discarded tank top covered with blood. In a grassy area near the highway, police found a small black folding knife covered with red-brown stains. Around midnight, officers went to Voisin's apartment. Nemec was not in the apartment, but officers eventually found him under a set of exterior stairs and arrested him. On June 1st, 2012, Following a jury trial in Bristol Superior Court, Jonathan Nemec was convicted of murder in the first degree for the death of Michael Correia. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On September 17, 2015, following an appeal, Mr. Nemec's guilty verdict was vacated and set aside. On September 30, 2016, following a jury trial in Bristol Superior Court, Mr. Nemec was convicted of murder in the first degree and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On November 19, 2019, following a second appeal, Mr. Nemec's guilty verdict was set aside and the Commonwealth moved to have another jury trial. On October 23, 2023, following a jury trial in Bristol Superior Court, Mr. Nemec was convicted of murder in the second degree and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. On August 28, 2025, Mr. Nemec appeared before the board for an initial hearing. On January 20, 2026, the following decision was made by the board. The board has significant concerns regarding Mr. Nemec's continued threatening conduct while incarcerated. He continues to receive disciplinary reports. Mr. Nemec has made minimal investments in rehabilitative programming, and his work history has been inconsistent. The board finds that Mr. Nemec would benefit from a forensic evaluation, so the board may consider his need areas and possible supervision and programming needs in the future and assist the board. The board considered opposition testimony from the Bristol County District Attorney's Office, as well as from 3 of Mr. Correia's family members. The board concluded that Jonathan Nemec has not demonstrated a level of rehabilitation that would make his release compatible with the welfare of society. The court documents end there. The world knew him as Michael Correia, but to me, he was just Mike. He was my brother. We had a 15-year age gap, grew up in separate towns, and looked forward to closing that distance after high school. That future was stolen when Mike was murdered in 2010. Years before that night, while recovering from a coma, Mike wrote a letter to our mom. He didn't know then what the future held. But at the bottom of that page, he left a postscript that has outlived every document and every courtroom. This is life after death.